welcome to this August edition of the FCCI Pathway to Purpose webinar. I've been tracking with some of the conversation that's already happening here in the chat. So welcome to Jamie, coming in from Peru, from Laura, there in Louisville, Kentucky. Ryan, in the sky still, on your way to land. Great to have you jumping in. And Alan coming to us out of Nevada, Reno. Thank you so much for jumping in here today. We'll look forward to being together in Tucson. I saw your note there. Robin, hey, great to see you. And folks, if you don't know Robin Merrill, you'll look forward to getting to know her if you're a part of a conference this year in September. So we are so thankful here at the Fellowship of Companies for Christ International for your desire to continue on this journey together, even in the chat here today, to be a part of encouraging each other and being a part of our kingdom stewardship together of these businesses that God has called us to lead for His glory. And I'm Ken Powell, a member of the FCCI leadership team. Well, we are honored to have the opportunity to connect. And so as you continue to chat there on YouTube, love the fact that we can get connected and get to know each other better and just continue to build this Christian community that God has called us to steward here at FCCI. And along those lines, we do have a community platform specific to the goal of bringing people together in community. It is called Connect, and it's found at fcci.org. If you haven't joined that community, it is a free community, a great chance to get to know others who are on this journey together. So check that out. Well, this week we have initiated a $150 discount for the international conference. So if you haven't registered yet, please do that. Use the code 150OFF when you register at the conference website. And you can find the link to the conference website on our main website at fcci.org. You know, the other item of note related to the conference is that if you just absolutely cannot be there in person this year, we will miss having you. But we will be live streaming many of the keynote presentations. There are several presentations that we cannot live stream for various reasons this year, but 8 of the sessions will be available on Monday through Wednesday, September 18 through 20. So those who are registered for today's webinar, you'll be receiving an email following the webinar with a link to register for those free live stream access opportunities. So check that out. And due to the fact that we are streaming from the conference in September, we are not going to have a webinar in September, but instead just encourage you to take advantage of those sessions from the ballroom at the Ritz-Carlton there at Dove Mountain. So it is our joy to kick into our webinar here today. And Sean, it's an honor to welcome you. And we're so thankful for your ministry and the insight that I know you're going to be sharing today. So welcome.
Well, thank you, Ken. Great to be with you guys.
And I know that you, like so many ministry leaders, like our ministry leader right now, is in the air headed into Raleigh-Durham. And but you've been on the road. And where are you coming to us from today?
Yeah, I had to jump on the 6 a.m. flight out of Denver to get to Seattle in time to be on the ground for this one and have some flexibility. So I'm in a little phone booth in one of the clubs here. So.
And in just a moment, he's going to pop out with his cape, and he's going to go save the world. And we're so thankful for it. So, well, Sean,
Okay.
Thanks so much for being flexible and being willing to jump in here in the midst of a busy schedule. It's awesome that you're willing to do that. And before I turn things over to Sean here, let me just remind you that in that YouTube chat, if you would just submit questions for Sean later, we'll do a little Q&A at the end after his presentation. So just put a Q in front of those so it's easy for me as a guy with old eyes to find those questions, and we can pop those into the chat later on. So with that, Sean, hey, I'll just go ahead and turn things over to you with our thanks.
Well, hey, thank you very much. And what a pleasure it is. I'm really looking forward to being with you and everybody down at Dove Mountain in just a couple weeks. But excited about the opportunity just to take some time here and kind of explore some of the things that we deal with, whether it be in our homes, whether it be in the workplace. Most of us on this call, I'm assuming, maybe I shouldn't be assuming, but I know that I'm assuming that most people are my age as opposed to the Millennials and Gen Z age, and it's really interesting because the dynamics between the multiple generations, I don't think it's ever been more confusing for people. Now, there's a lot of people who write books about the Millennials and the Gen Z, How do we manage them? How do we recruit them? How do we train them? How do we keep them? But my specialty is really the spiritual condition. My specialty is really understanding what they're thinking spiritually, how they're radically different than my generation was when we were growing up. And so my hope today is to bring some clarity maybe to the way that some of the people that you're engaging with think spiritually, and therefore maybe give you some tools that will help you engage with them, ask the right questions, really not push them away because of your faith, but really draw them in, because we know this, because we want to walk with Jesus, but we also want to glorify him. We want people to see him in us. We want the people who are lost and hurting and broken that surround us to understand the hope that you and I have discovered. And so really that's kind of what I'm hoping to do, is kind of share some insights, some tools that hopefully you'll walk away with, as well as I want to brag on what God's doing with Groundwire a little bit. And if nothing else, man, I want it to bring you hope. I know a lot of people are just kind of, struggling. They say, what's going on in our nation? What's going on with the younger generations? They're running away from the Lord, and they truly are. But there are some rumblings. There are some great things that are going on that we're really, really excited about. I'm going to break this down a little bit more clearly for you in just a minute, but I just want to really emphasize as we get going that the Millennials and Gen Z, the generations, are broken. They are lost and hurting. They have chaos in their life that you and I might understand a little bit, but it's amplified and it's so extreme in their own lives. A lot of them haven't been given the tools to know how to deal with it, so it continues to dominate their life even a little more than probably it should. But I do want you to know that I believe with my whole heart, and I believe that we're seeing this, that God is doing something unique with the younger generations. And I believe it's because they realize that what they're looking for truly is a spiritual answer, even though they sometimes are trying to avoid the spiritual part of their life. Read a book recently called Ignite Your Life. And just one of the quotes that stood out to me simply said that 80% of the unchurched in our nation are wanting to know about a God who can make sense out of the chaos in their world. They're just looking for somebody to introduce them to us, or to introduce them to him. And that's the opportunity that we really have, is we have the opportunity really to introduce people to the God who makes sense out of their chaos. Yes, he's the God who saves. He's the God who heals, but he's the God who brings peace and hope and love and joy. And I want to just kind of open with that. In Scripture, it says in Matthew chapter 9, verses 35 to 38, it's a very interesting passage because there's three primary parts to it. The first part basically shows Jesus's how he observes culture. It says that he was walking around and that he observed that it looked like people were harassed and helpless, like sheep without a shepherd. He looked at culture and he said, they're a mess. They don't know who to trust. They don't know what's going right and what's going wrong. They don't know who's telling them the truth and who's lying. And I think if we look at our culture, we could identify culture that way too. People don't know who to trust. They feel like it's, culture's just, the chaos is overwhelming. But then the interesting thing is the very next thing that Jesus said is he said, the harvest is ripe. Basically, when you find culture to be a mess, when you find that culture is that it's upended, that people don't know which way's up, which way's down, who to trust, where to find peace, hope, it says in that moment the harvest is ripe, because people are more open to experiencing, considering the claims of Christ in that moment than when everything else is going right and everything else is wonderful. And so because of that, there's an opportunity that we have right now to share Jesus. So it says, harassed and helpless like sheep without a shepherd. And then it says, the harvest is ripe. And then the very next thing it says, pray to the Lord of the harvest to raise up laborers, because the harvest is ripe, but the laborers are few. So here's the concept. The concept is they're more willing to consider the claims of Christ than we as the body of Christ right now are going to share him. They're waiting on us. We can't wait on them. They're waiting on us to cross the street and say, hey, everything that you're searching for is found in Jesus. And so those are some of the things that we're going to talk about here as we get going, and very excited to be with you. Jump too quick. I just want to start with these three concepts here. I believe if the body of Christ lived with these three principles, it really at the core of their view, I believe that our world would be different. It says God is still good, which most Christians would say, yeah, God's still good when things are good. But do we really believe that God is still good when maybe our dreams aren't coming to pass, or maybe when we have a child who's struggling, or maybe our business took a dip? Do we believe that God is still good? I'm convinced that God is still good even when my circumstances aren't great. The second one is the gospel is still powerful. Do we believe that? Do we believe that the gospel is still powerful? Do we believe that it truly is the answer that everybody is searching for? When I was in high school, I remember, and this was, I hate to admit it, but I looked at a young man who had everything going for him. He was the king of the campus. And I thought, you know what? He probably doesn't need Jesus. Or maybe I thought God can't break through. I wasn't convinced that the gospel was powerful. And now I know that God can go after, having problems with my glasses here, can go after anyone, and he can grab hold of their heart. And then the last thing, and the harvest is still ripe. When we're done here, you'll see God's still doing something in our nation. I had people come up to me all the time that say, man, I stopped praying for the harvest in our nation because I wasn't seeing it. I was seeing it over there, but I wasn't seeing it here. But the gospel is still powerful. So let's jump into this, kind of talk about the generation a little bit, and then we'll give you some tools to really break down. Then we'll talk about the ministry a little bit. So I wanted to do a quick thing. I want to take a generation quiz. This is easier to do if we were together, but I just want you to think through some of the questions. We're going to talk about millennials and Gen Z. We used to adopt some research that said that millennials were born between 81 and 96. But in 1991, the Pew Research Council released new data, and they said that they classify them between 1981 and 96. So it used to be 80 to 2000. Sorry, 80 to 2000. Now it's 91. So when we talk about these questions, think about millennials, Gen Z. So moving forward to questions, what percentage of those in Gen Z believe that truth is relative? Think about it. What percentage of high schoolers believe that you can make it up as you go, that there is no authoritative scripture, that you know what, it's just whatever works for me works? It's a really high number. It's 83%. Now think about the fact, what was that when you were a teenager? Was it that high? It was not when I was a teenager, at least the people I grew up with. So the trend of moving away from authoritative scripture, I can make it up as I go. I can't tell you how many people that I talk to online use this line of reasoning. They say, you know what? I know the Bible says that, but I don't like that, so I choose not to believe it. So that's really an interesting stat here too. What percentage of Gen Zs trust pastors to always or almost always do the right thing? It's only 26%. Now think about that. That means that 74% of Gen Zers drive past our churches and think, man, they're going to manipulate me. They're going to lie to me. They're going to take advantage of me. I can't trust them. It's not a safe place for me. I grew up with some real heathens, but even those heathens kind of looked at the church and thought, you know what? When I'm having a bad day, that's a safe place for me. The young people don't see it that way. And I understand how the media has amplified the distrust, and it's talked about the predators, and it's talked about the people who've made mistakes, to the point where they believe that everybody is that at that place. That is something that if we're going to age with young people, we have to understand that they're very skeptical about our spiritual leaders and about the things that we teach sometimes. What percentage of those in Gen Z say it's not important to believe in God, to be moral and have good values? It's 61%. 61% believe it's not important. I don't need to really believe in God. And so they don't see it as a distinction or even really as a benefit. What percentage of Gen Zs align with Protestant beliefs? Protestant belief starts with two primary things. Number one, the Bible's always true. And number two, Jesus is the only way to get to God. The number's 22%. Now, I will say this, I don't believe 22% live that way, but 22% would agree with that statement. What was it for my generation, Gen X? 44. So when you're looking at data points, you don't just look at data points, you look at trends. And from 44 to 22% in two generations, just think about what that's going to look like. We have a lot of praying to do, and we are begging God to move in these younger generations, because where our nation is going is not a pretty place. Which of these shows, that was just a joke one that I meant to take out. Sorry, what percentage of people who use the internet in the US use social media as well? It's 98%. So it's interesting. Usually when I share this quiz, there's two or three people in the room that don't use social media, but that is incredibly, incredibly rare. And so I have people who just pound that we can't get them to put down their phones. And I just want to shake them and say, but we can't get them to put down their phones. There's an opportunity there. I'm not saying as a parent that you shouldn't monitor that and help them navigate that. But I'm saying as a ministry guy who wants to get Jesus in front of them, that's one of the things that we use. What percentage of weekly news do Gen Z and millennials get from social media? This is an interesting one to me, 91%. Because what it says is they trust the opinion of their peers more than they trust anybody in authority over them. I had a guy in Nashville say to me one time, he said, I get it. He said, this is the first generation that we trained to raise themselves. We put them in preschool and they were in groups of 4 and 5 and 6 people, and they were taught to look out for each other. And sometimes the teacher didn't have much to do with it. So I find that interesting that 91% of people are getting news from social media and they're believing opinions. Now, I know that we're all skeptical about what's going on in traditional news formats and things like that. We know it's biased at best, corrupt at worst, but bottom line, they don't even look at that. They're really trusting their opinion of their peers. What's the number one internet search engine used by Gen Z? Is it Google, YouTube, DuckDuckGo, Bing? It's none. Now catch the language there. Search engine, it's TikTok. In October of last year, TikTok became the number one search engine for Gen Zs. What percentage of Gen Zs felt stressed or anxious either most of or all of the time? Usually when I'm here, somebody will say 66% because we know it's high. It's actually only 46%. But still, think about that. Half of the young people that we cross paths with feel stressed or anxious most of or all of the time. Not once in a while, not occasionally. We used to have bad hours, bad days. They're having bad months, bad years. And I don't necessarily agree that all of the things that they align with and say it's causing me anxiety, I don't think that it's all legit, but to them it is. And we have to understand that you have to meet them in that moment. How many TikToks videos does the average young person, millennial or Gen Z, watch every day? It's crazy, but 300. Again, I'm bringing up the addiction that they have to their media. And we know that it does a lot of it creates this competition. It creates this, I'm comparing my worst day with your best day because we don't post about our worst days. It creates a whole lot of things. But bottom line is they're getting the majority of they're growing up around these platforms, and we have opportunity to engage with them. They are lost and they're hurting and they're broken. And if we don't understand that, if we expect them to be whole, when I was a youth pastor, I went to a conference and I had 40 of my kids there. And I remember the guy on stage, he made a statement. He said, they call your generation the generation of pain because you've known more abandonment, rejection, divorce, and abuse than any generation before you. And I thought about that. I looked down at my students in the row and I thought, are they really the generation of pain? They're all smiling. They all got their Bibles out. They're all taking notes. And so I went back to my room that night and I said, God, if I'm preaching to a generation that is broken and I think that they're whole, which I had been doing, I need you to reveal it to me. They are a generation that is broken, and it's difficult to watch. I am not somebody who watches the Grammys and all of those shows, but in 2020, I was flipping through and I happened to land right as the 2020 Grammys was there. And there was a young lady who's just taken the stage, and her name was Demi Lovato. I don't know if you know who Demi Lovato is. She grew up on the Disney Channel. And she was a child star, a vocalist, pretty robust celebrity. And she started to sing a song on that stage. But the story behind the song was what was truly crazy. She had overdosed and almost died 2 years prior to this engagement. And 4 days before she overdosed, she wrote this song, and the song is called Anyone. And I never heard it before, didn't know anything about the story. But after I saw her performance, I went and I researched it and discovered that it was really her internal cry for help. And I realized she wrote it 4 days before she tried to kill herself. And she stood on a stage that day because after she went into rehab, that experience, she didn't stand on a stage until this day. 2 years later, she takes the stage and she sings a song, and she's a beautiful girl in a beautiful white dress and just a piano backing her up. And she starts into the song and she starts to weep, and she can't compose herself. And so she turns around and she has the pianist start again. And she sings this song that basically says, anyone, please send me someone, begging for someone to understand, begging for someone to see her. The lyrics, I don't have them all memorized, of course, but the lyrics went something like this. I tried to talk to my piano. I tried to talk to my guitar, something, confided into alcohol. And then she goes on and basically says, why do I sing when nobody's listening to me? Hell do I pray when nobody's listening to me? Anyone. And at the end of the song, she cringed through the last verse. It wasn't, I mean, she was contorting her face. It was gut wrenching to watch. And I'm sure it was painful to sing. And I was sitting there watching with my wife, and I said, that's the young people that we're going after. That's the generation. They're not whole. They're not normal. They're struggling. They're broken. They're anxious. They're hopeless. And they're crying out for somebody to help them. But I found something incredibly fascinating at the end of her song. She cried through the whole thing, but as soon as she was done, she wiped the tears from her eyes as the crowd erupted into a standing ovation. And she stood there smiling and waving as if it's all good. She masked back on to say, hey, I'm good. I'm fine now. The young people that are out there are struggling, but they're hiding behind this mask. And we as believers, we as parents and grandparents, we as employers and coworkers, we need to do everything we can to engage and to understand what's going on behind that mask, and know that what they're really searching for, that anyone that they're struggling to find, that anyone that they would love to have listened to them and encourage them, that anyone can be us, but most importantly, it has to be Jesus. Let me tell you a little bit about the spiritual beliefs of our audience. 71% are absolutely certain or fairly certain that God exists. It was kind of interesting. I had a conversation with a young lady in a restaurant, and her comment to me was, yeah, I believe that God exists. She said, I just don't believe that he can heal my heart. I don't believe he can help me with my anxiety. I don't think he can help me with my fear. And I said, that's so sad that you believe in God, but they believe in this God that is either incapable or unwilling, but they believe in God. But understand, they are not the type of people that are rejecting Jesus. They haven't been introduced to him. They may not believe you and I would define as God, but they believe in God, which is actually an opportunity for us to engage with them. One of the things I love to say to them is, hey, I bet you want to be close to God, but nobody's ever showed you how. And they say, no one ever has. So we have the opportunity to engage with them in that way. 68% believe in heaven, but 65% rarely or never attend church. So the left column is kind of, here's their belief. The right column is, hey, but it really doesn't impact my life, which is really important to remember. 65% on a government form would claim Christian, but less than 1 in 5 can tell you how to become one. They would claim to be a Christian. I guess I'm a Christian. I'm not a Muslim. I'm not an atheist. I guess I'm a Christian. But yet they don't even know what that really means. They don't know it's all about a relationship with Jesus. They may think that it's about the church, but it's really about Jesus, and we know that. Let me just tell you, this is not the generation that we're working with. These are the outliers. These are the ones who can't wait for the door of the church to open. And one of the challenges that we have is we look at the people who sit in our churches, who worship aggressively, who, just love Jesus. And we think, wow, the generation, this is who they are. They're not, they're the outliers. Let me explain it to you this way. According to the numbers, 7% of millennials and 13% of Gen Z are atheists. There is no God, 7 and 13%. On this side, you've got 13% and 15% that love Jesus, love the church. They find their identity, their tribe, and their purpose. But this 70% in the middle is what we're talking about. So you can't look at either outlier and think that's everybody. You have to look at the middle. And what's interesting is the Urban Dictionary recognizes this. The Urban Dictionary basically said the majority of young people in our nation are not monotheists and they are not atheists. The majority of young people in our nation are what they called apatheists. The majority of people in our nation are people, they define it this way in the Urban Dictionary, they define it as a young person who believes in God but ignores him. That's our generation. That's who we need to be looking for and aware of. They haven't rejected Jesus, but this is the generation. They're struggling to find hope and peace. The anxiety is tormenting them. They are dealing with substances to a very, very significant degree. To be, again, the word outliers. My generation, it was the outliers who really kind of indulged excessively. And now it's very, very common here. When Denver, Colorado, and when they legalized marijuana, a couple decades ago, on the 1-year anniversary of that ruling, the Denver Post had an article on the front page that said 13% of high school seniors admit to getting stoned every day. Now, when I was growing up, maybe 13% experimented in my school. Yes, I didn't take surveys, but they're saying 13% every day. They're struggling with substances and it's become so common for them. Their relationships are a mess. Vertically, horizontally, everything's a mess. Moms and dads, each other. I hate the fact that in our culture that relationships, because of certain TV shows and certain reality shows, they've become relationships have been a game to be won or lost instead of something to be prized. They're just like, I got to win. I got to, if you hurt me, I'm going to hurt you worse. And I'm going to hurt you sometimes before you hurt me. And then lastly, they look at our churches and they think that they're museums. They really don't see the purpose. 70% of the American millennials believe the American church is irrelevant. I don't believe that, but that's what they say on the surveys. Irrelevant. I don't see purpose in it. And so as we're considering what we're doing, we have to take Jesus to them. The old model was let's introduce them to a building so then we can introduce them to the man. Now the model is we've already voted on the building. We're not excited about it. Now it's introduce them to Jesus and then move them towards the building. For the Son of Man came to seek and save the lost. That's what I believe that our ministry is about. That he wants all men to come to a knowledge of the truth and be saved. The enemy's aggressive and we can't afford to be passive. There was something that happened. I'm sure you heard about it in New York. There was a gay pride parade and their quote was, their chant was, we're here, we're queer, and we're coming for your kids. Now I want to be very clear. I'm not talking about any alternative lifestyles. What I'm talking about is this: the enemy, the devil, he's coming for our kids. He's aggressive and we can't afford to be passive. And he's going to use every different ideology and but he's coming for our kids. The thief comes immediately to steal, kill, and destroy. He comes after our kids. We can't just sit back and say, we're going to let him have it. We hope it doesn't hit our home. We have to be militant. We have to be aggressive, not against people, for we do not battle against flesh and blood, but against principalities and powers. Well, I'm not talking about let's go find people who disagree with us. I'm talking about we have to start on our knees and understand that what we're fighting is a spiritual battle. It is cultural. It is political. It is all of those things. It's moral, but it's a spiritual battle. It's where it begins. That's where it ends. Here's what we do. We are aggressively evangelistic. We are culturally relevant. We are intelligently innovative. This talks about our heart and our drive. We wake up in the morning and say, how many people can we introduce to Jesus? We're not just sitting back and saying, we hope we find them. We're saying we're going to go find them. Culturally relevant, our messaging and audience. It has to look a little different. The message never changes, but the methodology of delivering it does. But the message is still Jesus. It can save, heal, deliver. He is the one who can meet every need that you have. And then the intelligently innovative, our methodologies and platforms. Let me tell you a little bit about what God's doing with us. And then I want to switch back and then we're going to take some questions in just a couple minutes, but I want to give you some tools too. This proves it. George Barna says, in 2019, he said that the average church in the United States sees one person a year come to Christ domestically. This is what we saw last year. 533,414 people profess faith in Jesus last year. Man, we can, if heaven can celebrate over every one, we can definitely celebrate. Yesterday, we had 1,670 some odd people come to faith. And then another thing is churches and denominations will tell you it costs them over $35,000 to see one person domestically walk the altar, give their life to Christ. Last year, our all-in cost was $7.97. And this year, it's going to be well under $7.20. We're seeing God do some amazing things. Here were our numbers from last year. Our commercials were seen 2.2 billion times last year. And think about that. We were able to whisper to people who were sitting in dorm rooms, people who are, what we do is we interrupt their entertainment on the TikToks and on the Instagrams of the world, and we interrupt them 2.2 billion times. We had 7.9 million people visit one of our websites. We had 533,000 professions of faith. Man, God is doing some amazing things. And I want to just kind of end with this. Life is too short to waste, and eternity is too long to ignore. We have a great opportunity to make this introduction, to lift up the name of Jesus, to tell people who are lost and broken and hurting and trying to do it on their own that God is with you. He's for you. He's the answer that you're looking for. Now, let me give you some tips. I know that I talk to a lot of parents and grandparents, a lot of coworkers who say, I want to talk about Jesus, but they shut down. Let me tell you what we do with all of our online volunteers who are seeing this incredible result. Is we use an acronym that I want to encourage you to consider. The acronym simply says it's LETS. It stands for listen, empathize, transition, and share. And what we've learned is people tend to, based on their own comfort zone and personality, they tend to gravitate either towards the top of that acronym or the bottom. So a lot of people will either listen and empathize. They're great at showing compassion. They're the hugger. They're the ones that just says, hey, I'm here for you. But nobody ever taught them how to transition, so they never get to share truth and answer and solution in Jesus. Whereas other people, they tend to just share and they don't want to listen and empathize. They don't know how to ask questions. And so they never dig in. And so I want to encourage you in your relationships to consider how you can listen, empathize, transition, and share. I'll give you a little bit more breakdown here before we kind of go into an opportunity for you to ask some questions. So listening, of course, starts with asking questions. And asking questions is a skill that you can develop. And it's a skill I believe that you have to develop. And a lot of times we are the kind of people who would rather tell people things than listen. But there is a significant difference when you're talking to somebody about Jesus and you say this to them, you need Jesus. Significant difference than when you say, hey, after hearing your story, I think what you're really searching for is Jesus. There's a difference. And the difference is because you listen. So I would encourage you to consider, how can you listen? So I'm just going to paint a picture here. If you're, sitting with your grandchild or sitting with your child, or maybe you're, somebody at work, just ask them questions. Just say, hey, tell me what's going on in your life, and listen. Say, what are you struggling with? There's a couple questions that I love when they are willing to have a spiritual conversation with me, but I'll ask the questions, things along the lines of, hey, tell me one word that you would use to describe your spiritual life. And I'm amazed at how they'll open up and they'll share with you what's really going on. I love to ask the question, if you could just change one thing about your life and something that you've been struggling with, you could just make it easier. If God would just take something away, or what would that one thing be? When I ask that question, what I get, even from my kids, is sometimes I'll see that vulnerability. I'll see that thing that they're struggling with. I'll see that thing that they don't talk about it often, but when they look in the mirror, that's when it's most prevalent. So ask questions, listen to them, empathize. Don't be a suck it up grandparent. Don't be a get over it. Be somebody who acknowledges and say, hey, I get that. I'm so sorry. I'm sorry that you're struggling with that. You're not enabling them to acknowledge that they're struggling with something. You're not you're not giving them permission to continue to be in that pit. So listen and empathize and then transition. Again, what you're looking for is not the truth that they need Jesus to be standalone, but how does that truth intersect what their pain is? If they're lonely, he is the one who will never leave you. If they've been disappointed, same thing. If they're lacking purpose, hey, there's a God in heaven. He created you and he knows what he put inside of you. He can bring the best out in you. If they're struggling with a broken heart, God can heal that broken heart. So connect. The transition piece is connecting Jesus to those things. And then ultimately, though, the transition and the sharing part is really giving them the gospel, sharing them that it's not good enough just to be aware. One of the things I tell people on our chat line all the time is, a lot of come online and they're aware of God, but they really don't know him personally. And it's that moment when you step into relationship with him, when it changes the trajectory of your life, your eternity, but it also gives you everything you've been craving. So, hey, Ken, I am ready to, I could keep talking forever, but I'd love to just try and be a little more meaningful, a little more specific and intentional with maybe some questions that would be helpful.
And I appreciate that. I was sitting here taking notes as fast as I could. I'm jotting things down and writing down your questions because this is great, Sean. I loved some of these specific questions. I just want to reiterate those real quick here. But the one word to describe your spiritual life, what a great place to start, just to open up that dialogue. That is fantastic as you just then listen. And then the one that
Ken,
you said, one thing, yeah.
Can I just speak in that? You'd
Yeah.
be surprised, like 5% of people, even in the church, the one word that they use is usually negative. It's not hopeful. It's not positive. They feel like they're failing.
Yeah.
And so that's when they let that drawbridge down. That's when you can rush in and build them up and encourage them, even if they're a believer who's struggling, as opposed to just somebody who's lost trying to find their way.
Yeah. 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 Absolutely. And that builds, I love that. It builds the bridge. And then that question of one thing you might change in your life. Is there a particular kind of trajectory of response that you hear with regard to that coming from the youth these days?
Yeah. What you get a lot of times is you get somebody who would, if you looked at them from the outside, you'd think totally unspiritual, not thinking about spiritual things at all. A lot of times you'll get, I wish I knew how to connect with God better, or I wish I was more disciplined in this area, or I wish I knew how to pray. I mean, they will basically open the door for you to really rush in and share what you know and really kind of take it in more of a meaningful direction.
Yeah. Well, and that ties to one of the things that Bonnie Mock had shared earlier, where she said she had quoted you when you had said they're waiting for us to cross the street and say everything you're waiting for is found in Jesus. They're just looking for you to come to where they are, and I really appreciate your emphasis on that. So, well, the listen, emphasize, transition, share, folks. If you didn't write that down, it's simple enough. So let's write that down and hang on to that. So when it comes to transition, how does the truth intersect their pain? Robin was mentioning just how good that is to think through that. Where is that intersection point between truth and pain, and to be able to determine that? So share with me a little bit more, as you talk about the folks that are counseling, that are coaching, that are on your lines and speaking into the lives of these folks. What is the process there of getting folks to be engaged and even training them in that process?
So our process is really fivefold. It's number one, we do marketing to get those commercial views. Second thing we do is we invite them into a conversation. So one of our websites, we have 16, but one of our websites is jesuscares.com. So the tag there quite often is, when life hurts, Jesus cares, chat with someone who understands. If our tag was, when life hurts, Jesus cares, come read what we think, nobody would come, but they're actually intrigued by the fact that somebody's willing to take some time for them. So we have this massive team, about 1,700 people in English and Spanish, that volunteers manage this this chat line, and every day, every moment of every day, there's 4, 6, 12, 15, 18 conversations going. And so there's it's one of our greatest needs because of how we've been growing. What we need is we need more people that will work with us and walk with us, that are looking for a ministry opportunity. And it's really interesting. After you go through our training, then you can log in literally any time of the night or day. It can be 3 in the morning or 3 in the afternoon. It can be 7 in the evening. It could be 7 at 8 in the morning. There's people that want to talk to you. And so it's pretty exciting because people are logging in and they'll say, "Hey, I just saw this commercial, and it said when life hurts, Jesus cares. Does he really care about me?"
Hmm.
Because sometimes it feels like he doesn't.
Hmm.
Or they'll say, one of my favorite stories was a young lady logged in and she said, "Do I matter?" And immediately I thought of how many people do I cross paths with every day that would ask, somebody at the car wash, somebody or an accountant or a lawyer who would look and say, "Do I matter?" Basically, what she was screaming out is, "Do you see me?
Right.
Am I meaningful?
Yeah.
Don't just walk past me." And she's instantly connected to one of our volunteers, and the volunteer did a great job. She just said, "You absolutely matter.
Hmm.
You matter to me."
Amen.
She said, "I'm sure there's people in your life that you matter to, but most importantly, you matter to God."
Hmm.
She said, "Has anybody ever told you what God sees when he looks at you?" And she said, "No." And she said, "Let me tell you." And she just grabbed some one-liners and said, "You are the crown of his creation. You're the apple of his eye. You are fearfully and wonderfully made. You're created in his image." I laid out 4 things and then got to the end and said, "Not only that, but God thinks you matter so much that he said, I don't want to spend eternity without you. I want to make a way so you can spend eternity with me." And the coach said, "Has anybody ever told you what he did for you?" And she said, "No." Let me tell you, laid out the gospel message, said, "What do you think? Is today the day you want to place your trust in Jesus?" And she said, "Absolutely." She said, "How is it possible? Nobody's ever told me this before. I went to church before."
Hmm. Wow.
Anyway, ended up praying, giving her life to Christ online. But then I love the way the coach ended it. She actually came back and she asked this question. She said, "You came online with a question. Now I'm going to ask it back to you. You said, 'Do I matter?' But now that you know what Jesus sees when he looks at you, now that you have a relationship with him,
Hmm.
now that you're going to heaven, I want to ask you, do you matter?" And she came back. She came on with all question marks. She came back with 3 exclamation points, and she came back with all caps. And she said, "I do matter."
Amen.
And it's amazing if they just feel like somebody will
Hmm.
listen to them, how much they will listen to you. And again, gives us the opportunity not to
Yeah.
tell them our stories, but to tell his story.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, we have a follow up here on that point of just help us understand what Groundwire does then to help disciple and grow them up spiritually. What does that process look like?
Yeah, so we have 5 different growth tracks once they come to faith, and it's based on each website.
Hmm.
And to be honest, I would love for you to be praying with us about this because we found what we've been looking for, meaning we have been trying to find the right partner relationship for years. Because we know over here you've got secular youth culture, which is what we go after. 15 to 34-year-olds walking separate from Jesus. On this side, you've got the church community.
Hmm.
We know we need to connect the two, and we've been struggling. We figured out how to do it. The problem is it's so manpower intensive. And so again, we have everything from we have a 21-day reading plan that is called the 21-day challenge. Get to know Jesus. We have a 7-day video series that we send them. It's kind of basically spiritual disciplines framed in story like they like. But
Yeah.
this is the most important one: is we're offering to connect them with a person who will walk with them for the first 4 weeks of their spiritual journey. And with that, we're praying for them, supporting them, encouraging them, getting them involved in basic drip discipleship, and then learning enough about them where at the end of the 4 weeks, we cannot say go to church because that sounds like a rule. We can say, hey, we have friends in your local community in a faith-based peer group. So moms with moms, somebody who's struggling with alcohol, maybe with Celebrate Recovery, college ministries with college ministries, men with men. When we can get them connected to a peer group within the first 4 weeks, the success of that is really strong.
Yeah. Yeah, that's fantastic. So for those of you that are today, we had over 90 registered. So boy, just think about even that workforce, what that could do as a part of both being coaching, being on the line chat and to respond, but then maybe being a part of that follow up and discipleship and growth process. So there's an opportunity there to potentially step into and connect. Yeah.
Ken, one of my favorite stories was one of our new volunteers. He reached out to me after about 6 weeks, and he said, "Man, I've led 9 people to Christ so far." He said, "This has blown me away." He said, "You want to know what it reminds me of?" He said, "It reminds me of going fishing with my grandpa." He said, "I loved fishing with my grandpa because he loved fishing." And he said, "I found his joy." He said, "When I get online and I'm talking to people about Jesus, I know it brings my father joy." He said it brings. Then he went on, and this is another part of it that I loved is he said, also, when I would go fishing with my grandpa, he said, my grandpa did all the work, but he gave me all the credit. He said he baited the fish, he cast it, he reeled it in, he would clean it later, but I got to stand there and take a picture with that fish, like I did something. He said, God is baiting the hook. He's drawing people to a place where they give their life to Christ, and I get to be there to be a part of this. And I thought, man, what a great analogy for these people that are out there serving in this way. It's a joy to just partner with your Father, and it's so fun to fish when you catch fish.
Yeah. Oh, that's fantastic. And Robin Merrill just asked a question. Thanks, Robin. Can you describe maybe a little more for us, Sean, just that process of training? What does that look like? What does that process look like for a volunteer to step into that role?
Yeah. We call it the Groundwire Training Academy. It is through a learning management system. So it's video based. It's broken into 4 different categories, which is the heart of the ministry, the how-tos of the ministry. How do I talk to a Muslim? How do I talk to a Hindu? How do I talk to a suicidal kid? There's the technology of the ministry. And then this is horrible, but I can't remember what the 4th one is, but it basically the videos and the tests and things that you go through are about 6 to 7 hours in length, but you can't do it all in one setting. You have to go through. So it takes the average person about 10 to 14 days working on a little bit here and there to get through it. And then after you've gotten through it, then you're assigned a mentor to walk with you for a couple weeks and to make sure that your questions are answered, to make sure that you're feeling comfortable when you're online.
Yeah. Oh, that is really fantastic. Well, I know there were a couple of questions or just about the statistics and the things that you were that you were sharing earlier. Folks, just so you know, those will be available to you. We have that slide deck that'll be coming to you in the email following the webinar today. But as far as where you were sourcing some of that, it probably comes from a lot of different places. Was there any particular place that getting most of this from?
The statistics in the quiz?
Yeah.
I could find any one for you, but we keep, looking. We're learners. We have to be. We have to understand the culture, the generation. And so they've all been taken from different things. Barna has done a lot of that research, but it's probably been in 4, 5, 6 different studies. But I could get those sourced for you. If anybody is interested, you can email me directly, and I'd be happy to have somebody track down where we found those.
Sure. Well, I am so excited about the fact that you are speaking at the conference in September. You're going to be presenting there, doing a breakout session for our attendees there, and looking forward to just continuing this process of learning and growth. And for most of us that are maybe business owners are typically a little further along in life and trying to figure out how do we have these conversations and how do we do it in a healthy way that honors the Lord and builds those bridges, those points of connection. So Sean, I just really appreciate you taking the time today. I know this has been really meaningful for us. So safe travels. Hope everything goes well for you there in Seattle and get back home safely. But thank you again for being with us.
Thanks.
Awesome. Well, do join us for the conference live stream. If you're not able to be there in person, you'll see that link coming to you here in just a few minutes in the email following up on this webinar today. So register for that, and we'll look forward to having you be a part of future webinars with us following our conference, October and forward. Got some wonderful things lined up, so look forward to seeing you then. Have a wonderful rest of your day today.